My parents said I was a useless failure and threw me out. My name's Adrian. I'm 32, and I can tell you right now, money doesn't magically shield you from family drama. I've been working since I was 18, building my own business from scratch after walking away from college. Back then, my parents thought I was making the dumbest mistake of my life. "You'll never amount to anything without a degree," my mom told me while stirring her coffee like she was auditioning for a soap opera. My dad just grunted in agreement, which was his usual way of dismissing anything I said. They didn't know I had already started my first online venture, a niche e-commerce store that would eventually grow into a series of companies generating millions a year. But back then, all they saw was a reckless, naive kid who didn't want to work hard. We were never a close family. My parents were the type who measured worth by appearances and status. My older sister, Lily, was their pride and joy, a corporate lawyer with a pristine LinkedIn profile, luxury handbags for every season, and the kind of cold, calculated confidence that could make a room go quiet. She was the success story they paraded in front of family friends. I was the cautionary tale. Anytime I came over for dinner, they'd manage to slip in jabs, disguised as concern. "Still doing that little internet thing?" my dad would ask, chuckling as if it were a phase I'd outgrow, like collecting comic books. Lily would smile politely and say, "You know, it's never too late to get a real job." For years, I let it slide. I figured there was no point in defending myself. They wouldn't believe me anyway. And truthfully, I was busy. Building a business from the ground up takes everything you have, and I didn't have the energy to prove myself to people who had already decided I was a disappointment. So I kept my life quiet. I didn't brag about my earnings. I didn't mention that I'd bought my own house in cash by 27, or that I could afford to travel anywhere in the world on a whim. I just smiled through the family dinners, endured the comments, and went home to the life they assumed I didn't have. The breaking point came on a rainy Thursday evening. I'd stopped by my parents' house after my mom texted me asking if I could help with something. When I got there, my dad was in the living room pacing. Lily was sitting on the couch with a glass of wine, smirking like she already knew I was in trouble. My mom stood by the fireplace, arms crossed as if she were about to announce some devastating news. "Adrian," my dad started, "we've been talking. You're 32 years old, and it's clear this online nonsense isn't going anywhere. You've had enough time to figure your life out, but you're still wasting your potential." I felt my jaw tighten. "What exactly are you getting at?" He stopped pacing and pointed toward the door. "You've been living in that apartment for years, and you're still here asking for help with small things. We can't keep enabling you." I blinked, confused. "Enabling me? I've never asked you for money, not once." Lily let out a short laugh. "Oh, come on, Adrian. You've been coasting. You think anyone believes you're making a living off your little business? It's sad, honestly." My mom stepped in, voice sharp. "We've decided it's time for you to stand on your own 2 feet for real. No more coming here when you need help. No more expecting us to bail you out." I stared at them, stunned. "I don't need you to bail me out. I'm doing just fine." My dad's voice rose. "If you're doing so fine, then you can prove it by surviving without our help at all. In fact, you can leave now. Go live in the streets if you have to. Maybe that will wake you up." The room went quiet except for the rain hitting the windows. I glanced at Lily, who was sipping her wine like she was watching a show she'd been waiting all week to see. I could feel the heat rising in my chest, but I forced myself to stay calm. They thought they were delivering some harsh reality check. They thought I'd beg, maybe promise to do better or get a real job. They had no idea I could buy their house 3 times over without touching my savings. I picked up my jacket from the chair and slipped it on. "All right," I said softly, almost smiling. "If that's what you want." My mom opened her mouth, probably to add one more dig, but I didn't give her the chance. I walked out, shutting the door behind me. As I got into my car, a black sedan that they assumed was a used model I'd barely been able to afford, I caught my reflection in the rearview mirror. I wasn't angry. I wasn't hurt. I was almost amused because I knew something they didn't, something they were going to find out in a way they'd never forget. And as the rain poured harder, I drove off into the night, already knowing that 3 weeks from now, their entire view of me and of themselves was going to shatter. The first week after they threw me out was strangely quiet, not emotionally quiet. I had plenty of thoughts running laps in my head, but quiet in the sense that there were no calls, no texts, no follow-up from them. I didn't expect an apology, but some part of me had thought maybe they'd at least check if I was okay. Nothing. It was as if I'd been erased from the family roster entirely. I spent those days working from my home office, though home office doesn't quite do it justice. The place was a modern penthouse overlooking the city with floor-to-ceiling windows and a study lined with leather-bound books I'd collected over the years. I could sit at my desk and see the skyline stretching into the horizon, a constant reminder of just how far I'd come from the kid they once called a failure. By the second week, I started hearing things from mutual acquaintances, subtle hints that my parents and Lily were concerned about me. Not concerned as in worried for my well-being, but concerned as in shaking their heads and telling people I'd finally hit rock bottom. My mother, it seemed, had told her church friends that I was living out of my car now because my little internet project collapsed. Lily had apparently told one of my old high school friends that I was finally learning life's lessons the hard way. They weren't just painting me as a failure. They were actively building the narrative. One night, I got a text from my cousin Jacob, one of the few family members who had always treated me like an equal. Jacob. Hey man, I overheard something tonight. You okay? Me. Define okay. Jacob. Your mom was telling people at dinner that you're basically homeless. She said you'll probably come crawling back soon. Me. Interesting. Jacob. Also, Lily made a joke about maybe letting you do odd jobs for her firm when you're desperate enough. She said you'd look good fetching coffee. I stared at that last message for a while, letting the words sink in. It wasn't surprising. Lily had been making those kinds of digs for years, but hearing it now after they had already kicked me out hit differently. It was like watching someone set fire to a bridge you had already decided never to cross again just to make sure it was gone. The third week rolled around, and I decided to make an appearance at my parents' Sunday dinner. Not as a guest, I wasn't invited, but as an observer. Jacob had mentioned that these dinners had become a weekly ritual ever since I left. I pulled up in my car, this time my other car, the one they didn't know I owned. A sleek silver coupe that turned heads without even trying. I parked a few houses down so they wouldn't see me arrive. From the sidewalk, I could see them through the dining room window. My parents at the head of the table, Lily beside them, all smiles. The conversation seemed animated. Glasses of wine raised, plates full. I could imagine the script. Lily talking about her latest case, my parents beaming, and then right on cue, a mention of how ungrateful I'd been, how I'd wasted my potential. I wasn't angry anymore. No, what I felt was something colder, something sharper. This wasn't just about me leaving their house. This was about the fact that they were using me as a cautionary tale to make themselves look better. They were rewriting my life into a failure story because it made them feel righteous and in control. 2 days later, I got a call from my mom, not to reconcile, but to ask for a favor. Her tone was light, almost mocking. Adrian, darling, your father and I are going to need your help moving some old furniture next weekend. Since you've got nothing else going on, you should have the time. I had to bite the inside of my cheek to keep from laughing. Sorry, I'm busy. She sighed like I was being difficult on purpose. Busy with what? Work. She let out a small, knowing laugh. Of course, your business. Well, try to make time for family, okay? You might need us someday. That was the moment I realized just how deep their condescension ran. They genuinely believed they were the safety net I'd fall into when life inevitably crushed me. They couldn't even fathom the possibility that I didn't need them, hadn't needed them in years. And yet, even as they belittled me, a small part of me decided to play along just a little longer. Because if I revealed everything now, the impact wouldn't be nearly as satisfying as it could be. No, I'd let them stack the insults, pile on the false narratives, dig themselves deeper into this hole they were building. Because when the truth finally came out, I wanted it to hit them so hard they'd never recover from the embarrassment. And that moment was coming, much sooner than they thought. By the time the fourth week hit, I'd settled into a kind of detached calm about the whole situation. I knew exactly where I stood with them now, and I wasn't losing sleep over it. But just when I thought I'd seen the worst of their pettiness, they managed to find a new low. It started on a Thursday morning with an email from my bank. Subject line: unusual account activity, immediate attention required. My first thought was that it might be some phishing scam, but when I logged into my account, I froze. 2 large withdrawals, each over $7,000, had been made from one of my older accounts. The account wasn't one I actively used anymore, but it was still open because it was tied to a joint savings plan my parents had opened for me when I was a teenager. I had meant to close it years ago, but it had slipped my mind. Both withdrawals were marked as in-person transactions, and both were from a branch 2 blocks from my parents' house. At first, I tried to think of a reasonable explanation. Maybe some banking error, maybe identity theft. But when I called the branch and got the details, my stomach dropped. The teller remembered the withdrawal clearly. According to her, my mother had come in, said I'd authorized her to access the funds for a family emergency, and walked out with a cashier's check both times. I don't know what made my hands shake more, the theft itself, or the fact that she'd done it so casually, as if my money was hers to take whenever she pleased. I didn't call her right away. I needed to be calm. And right then, I wasn't. Instead, I called Jacob. "You're not going to believe this," I said, explaining what had happened. There was a long pause. "Adrian, I think I know where that money went." "Where?" He hesitated. "Lily just put a down payment on a new luxury SUV. She was bragging about how it was a gift from the family for all the hard work she does." The words hit me like ice water. It wasn't enough for them to treat me like a failure. They'd actually stolen from me to reward Lily. My mother had literally walked into a bank, emptied my account without permission, and funneled the money straight to the golden child, probably while telling herself it was perfectly justified. That night, I drove to my parents' house. I didn't go inside. I wasn't ready for the confrontation yet, but I parked across the street and just sat there staring at the warmly lit windows. Inside, I could see them in the living room. Lily was holding up a set of car keys, and my mom was taking a photo, probably to post online later. My dad was laughing, clapping her on the shoulder like she'd just won some award. I don't remember how long I sat there, but I do remember the feeling in my chest shifting. Up until now, there'd been some faint lingering thread of loyalty that held me back from going too far. But in that moment, watching them celebrate with my money, that thread snapped clean. Later that week, I got a text from my mom. "Hope you're not upset about the savings account. It was just sitting there and your sister needed help. You'll make more money someday. Family comes first." I stared at that message for a long time. No apology, no acknowledgement that it was theft, just a smug, almost patronizing justification. I didn't reply. I didn't have to, because in that moment, something inside me shifted from quiet endurance to cold resolve. This wasn't about proving my success to them anymore. This was about showing them that the bridge they burned wasn't just gone. It had been replaced with a fortress they'd never get near again. And they were about to learn exactly what that meant. After the SUV incident, the air around me felt heavier. Not in the sense that I was collapsing under it, but more like the atmosphere before a storm. I wasn't angry in a hot, impulsive way anymore. It was a quieter kind of weight, the kind that sits in your bones and doesn't let you forget. I didn't tell anyone else about what had happened. Not friends, not colleagues, not even my business partners. I didn't want sympathy. And honestly, part of me was embarrassed that I'd allowed myself to be in a position where they could take from me so easily. I was supposed to be smart, careful, strategic. Yet, I'd left that account open like an unlocked door, and they'd waltzed right through. For the next couple of weeks, I pulled back from everything. I stopped attending certain meetings. I ignored a few social invites. I even skipped a quarterly networking event I never missed just so I wouldn't have to answer questions about my family. I told people I was busy with big projects, but in reality, I was holed up in my penthouse, letting the silence wrap around me. It wasn't that I was depressed, at least not in the way people expect when they hear that word. I still woke up early, still hit the gym every morning, still kept my businesses running smoothly. But something inside me felt raw, almost hollow. Every time I thought about my parents and Lily, it was like replaying a movie where the ending was always the same. Me as the punchline to their inside joke. One night, I sat at my kitchen island with a glass of whiskey, scrolling through old photos on my phone. There was one from 5 years ago. My parents and Lily standing in front of a rented beach house, smiling for the camera while I stood off to the side, half in the frame. That had been the year they'd forgotten to mention that the trip was already planned and fully booked when they invited me. I'd ended up on a couch in the living room while Lily got the master suite. The more I looked at that picture, the more I realized something. This wasn't new. The theft, the lies, the public humiliation. It was just the most recent chapter in a story that had been playing out my entire life. I'd always been the one expected to compromise, to give more than I got, to quietly absorb whatever they dished out. And maybe that's why they were so sure they could take my money and get away with it. They thought I'd sulk for a bit, maybe give them a cold shoulder, but eventually come back for the next Sunday dinner like nothing happened. That's when my thoughts started to shift. Not toward confronting them immediately. I wasn't going to storm over and demand my money back. No, I started thinking about leverage, about timing, about how much sweeter the payoff would be if I didn't just call them out, but dismantled the whole fantasy they built around themselves. The first step was subtle. I had my lawyer quietly start the process of locking down every account, every property, every asset in my name, making sure there wasn't a single weak link left for them to exploit. At the same time, I reached out to a private contact, someone who specialized in gathering financial and legal records that weren't exactly public knowledge. I told him I wanted a full picture of my family's financial situation. Not because I needed the information immediately, but because I had a feeling it would be useful down the road. And while all of that was in motion, I kept my distance. No calls, no texts, no showing up at family events. I wanted them to get used to my absence, to start thinking they'd successfully pushed me out for good. The more comfortable they felt, the more blindsided they'd be later. But that distance had a price. Some nights I'd be sitting in my living room with the city lights stretching out below me, and it would hit me how small my circle had become. My friends didn't ask questions, but they noticed. Jacob tried to check in a few times, but I kept the conversation short. It was easier to stay in my own head than to explain what I was working toward. I knew I was isolating myself, and I knew it wasn't healthy, but I also knew it was necessary because when you're planning something this big, you can't afford loose ends. You can't afford to be sloppy. And quietly, in the back of my mind, a date started forming. I didn't circle it on the calendar, didn't write it down anywhere, but I knew when the moment would come, and I knew exactly where they'd be when it happened. The shift wasn't dramatic at first. It was more like turning a dimmer switch. One week, I was keeping my head down. The next, I was leaning back into my routines with a precision and focus I hadn't felt in months. I dove into my businesses with a renewed clarity, almost like I'd been coasting before and hadn't realized it. My flagship company had been doing well for years, but there were 2 expansion projects I'd been putting off. One in Europe and one in Southeast Asia. I greenlit both within the same week. That meant hiring new teams, forging partnerships, and locking down multimillion-dollar contracts that would cement our brand globally. And I wasn't just doing it for the revenue, though the numbers were staggering. I was doing it to ensure my influence and reach were undeniable. I wanted my footprint to be so big that when the moment came, there would be no question in anyone's mind about who I was and what I'd built. At the same time, I started networking again, but with intention. Instead of generic business mixers, I attended high-level investor dinners, tech summits, and charity galas. I made sure to be seen in rooms my family could only dream of entering. I shook hands with people who could, with a single phone call, change the trajectory of an entire industry. And I did it quietly. No social media bragging, no press releases, because I wanted this to be something they discover on someone else's lips, not mine. By mid-year, one of my smaller companies, a software startup I'd invested in, had been acquired for 8 figures. My cut alone was enough to buy half the properties in my parents' neighborhood outright. The same week the deal closed, I wired a significant portion into an investment account that was already overflowing. The rest I reinvested into ventures that would keep the growth compounding. But the real power wasn't just in the money. It was in the connections. Over coffee in Manhattan, I met with an influential editor from a national business magazine. We talked shop, and somewhere between the cappuccinos and the check, she floated the idea of doing a feature on self-made entrepreneurs who had been underestimated early on. The irony wasn't lost on me. I didn't confirm anything then, but I kept her card in my wallet. It wasn't time yet. Meanwhile, the reports from my financial contact were trickling in, and the picture they painted of my family situation was enlightening. My parents' retirement savings were thinner than I thought. Lily, despite her high-paying job, was sitting on a mountain of debt from a mix of bad investments and a taste for luxury she couldn't quite afford. That SUV, at least the down payment they'd stolen from me, barely covered the initial fees, and she'd quietly taken out a second mortgage on her condo last year. It wasn't just satisfying to know. They were vulnerable. And that meant when the time came, the impact of my next moves wouldn't just be emotional. It would be practical, tangible. On the surface, though, I kept my distance. The family still held their Sunday dinners, still spoke about me in the past tense, still fed the narrative that I was finding myself somewhere far from reality. But through mutual acquaintances, I began to hear little cracks forming in their certainty. A friend of Lily's had apparently spotted me at a luxury hotel in Singapore mid-meeting with a group of sharply dressed executives. My mother's hairdresser mentioned that she'd overheard someone talking about a CEO named Adrian closing a massive deal overseas. The rumors were starting to reach them, and though they didn't confront me directly, I could feel the curiosity and unease building. I didn't rush it. Power is best revealed in controlled doses, and I wasn't interested in wasting it on a premature showdown. No, I wanted them to be off balance, second-guessing everything they thought they knew, right up until the day I pulled the rug out from under them completely. And when that day came, it wouldn't just be about proving them wrong. It would be about changing the dynamic forever, about making sure they understood without a shadow of doubt that whatever role they thought they played in my life was over. The thing about revenge is that it's not about speed. It's about precision. You don't just strike the moment you get the chance. You wait until the moment is so perfect, so airtight that your move can't be undone or dismissed. By now, the information my contact had been gathering was complete, and what I saw on paper confirmed what I'd been suspecting for months. My family's image of stability was mostly smoke and mirrors. My parents were on the brink of needing to downsize, but refused to admit it publicly. Lily's financial situation was worse than I'd thought. Maxed out credit cards, high-interest loans, and a lease on that SUV she could barely keep up with. She had even started skipping payments on her second mortgage. One piece of information, however, caught my attention more than anything else. Buried in my father's financial records was a note about an early investment in a small property development company, one that had been quietly circling the drain for the past year. The kicker. My father had personally guaranteed a loan for the company. If it went under, he'd be on the hook for the full amount, well into 6 figures. And judging by the reports, it was about 3 months from collapse. That was the moment I knew how to set the stage. I didn't need to destroy them financially. That would make me look vindictive. No, what I needed to do was let them walk right into a situation where their arrogance and assumptions would undo them, and I'd be there in a position they could never have imagined. Around the same time, I got a call from the business magazine editor I'd met in Manhattan months earlier. She was moving forward with her underestimated entrepreneurs feature and wanted me to be the centerpiece. Not just a small write-up, a multi-page spread with professional photos, my full story, and an emphasis on the early days when people told me I'd never make it. I agreed immediately, but gave her one condition. The release date had to align with a certain month, the same month my father's failing investment was due to implode. As all this was falling into place, an unexpected opportunity landed in my lap. A real estate investment firm I'd done business with before reached out with an offer. They were acquiring distressed assets from smaller developers and needed an infusion of capital from someone they trusted. I'd been one of their top investors in the past, so they were offering me first choice on the deals. When they sent over the list of properties, I almost laughed. Sitting there in the portfolio, highlighted in red as high risk, was a block of partially developed townhomes owned by none other than my father's struggling property company. I didn't commit right away. I asked questions, reviewed the contracts, and quietly positioned myself so that if the company defaulted, as the report suggested it would, I could acquire the entire project through the investment firm at a fraction of its value. That meant not only would my father's company lose the project, but I'd own it without ever having to deal with him directly. And the best part, on paper, it would look like nothing more than a smart business move on my part. No direct attack, no traceable vendetta. While those gears were turning, I kept my distance from the family, but I made sure my name kept floating into their conversations. Jacob mentioned to me that my mom had asked him if I'd gotten lucky with something because she'd heard I'd been flying first class internationally. Lily had apparently asked a mutual acquaintance if I was actually doing well or just pretending for appearances. I could feel their curiosity gnawing at them, and I knew that curiosity would turn to shock soon enough. I wasn't just getting into a powerful position. I was about to control the board they didn't even realize we were playing on. And when the moment came to make my move, it would be public, undeniable, and perfectly timed to land when they needed me most. When the month finally arrived, everything I'd been putting in place over the past half year was lined up like dominoes, ready to fall in sequence. All I had to do was tap the first one. The business magazine feature hit newsstands on the first Monday of the month. My face was on the cover. Polished suit, skyline backdrop, headline in bold letters. From doubt to dominance. The self-made visionary who proved everyone wrong. The article didn't name my family directly, but it didn't have to. The narrative was clear. I had been told I'd never succeed, had been underestimated by those closest to me, and had quietly built an empire worth tens of millions. The timing couldn't have been more perfect. Within hours, the piece was circulating online, shared across social media, business groups, and even LinkedIn circles my sister frequented. That same day, my phone buzzed nonstop. Colleagues, old friends, even distant acquaintances were congratulating me. And right on cue, I got the text I'd been expecting from my mother. Adrian, we saw the magazine. We had no idea things had gotten this big for you. We're proud of you. Proud. The word sat in my mind like a bitter pill. After years of dismissal, after stealing from me, now they were proud. I didn't reply. 2 weeks later, my father's property development company officially defaulted on its loan. The bank moved quickly, and the real estate investment firm I'd partnered with swept in to acquire the project at a steep discount. As planned, my capital bought me controlling ownership of the entire development. On paper, it was just another smart acquisition. In reality, it was me holding the deed to my father's single biggest asset without him even knowing. I waited 3 days before the next step. Then I had my assistant arrange a meeting with my parents and Lily at a neutral location, a high-end restaurant downtown. The invitation came under the guise of discussing a business opportunity. And given their sudden shift in tone after the magazine feature, they were eager to accept. When they arrived, they were all smiles. My mother hugged me for the first time in years. My father shook my hand like we were old business partners. Lily complimented my suit, her voice dripping with a politeness I'd never heard from her before. We ordered dinner, exchanged small talk, and then halfway through the main course, I slid a folder across the table. Inside was the ownership document for the development they'd been clinging to as their big investment. My father's smile faltered as he read it. This is our property, he said slowly. Correction, I said, my voice calm. It was your property. It's mine now. They stared at me in stunned silence. I didn't raise my voice, didn't gloat, just laid out the facts. Their company had defaulted. The bank had offloaded the project. I'd bought it legally at a fair price through an established firm. I explained it the way a surgeon might describe a clean cut. Precise, unemotional, final. My mother's cheeks flushed red. Adrian, how could you? How could I? I cut in, my tone sharpening just slightly. The same way you walked into my bank account and took my money without permission. The same way you gave it to Lily like it was yours to give. The same way you kicked me out of your house and told people I was homeless. I just learned from the best. Lily's jaw tightened, but she didn't speak. My father sat back in his chair, eyes darting between the papers and my face. For the first time, he looked small to me, not in size, but in presence. I leaned forward, resting my elbows on the table. The difference between you and me is that I didn't have to lie or steal to make this happen. I played the long game, and now when this development turns a profit, and it will, not a cent will have your name on it. The table was silent except for the clink of cutlery from nearby diners. They didn't argue. They didn't apologize. They just sat there, the weight of what had happened settling over them like a heavy fog. I finished my meal in silence, paid the bill, and stood. "Enjoy your evening," I said, my tone polite, almost casual. "Oh, and don't worry about the staff at the development site. I've already told them the change in ownership won't affect their jobs, just yours." And with that, I walked out, leaving them sitting in the warm glow of the restaurant's chandeliers, the reality of their new position in my world settling in like a cold wind. The fallout came faster than I expected. 3 days after that dinner, I got a call from Jacob. His voice was low, like he wasn't sure whether to sound concerned or impressed. "Your parents are losing it," he said. "Your dad hasn't left the house in 2 days. Mom's been calling around trying to fix things, but everyone she talks to already knows you own the property." And well, people are talking. It turned out the story had spread beyond the family circle. My father's failed investment wasn't just a quiet embarrassment. It was public knowledge in their social sphere. The same people they used to boast to at dinner parties now whispered about how their reckless son had somehow outmaneuvered them in business. I didn't have to lift a finger to make that happen. People love a twist, and this one was too juicy to keep quiet. Lily didn't fare much better. Her SUV lease was up for renewal, and without my parents covering her emergencies anymore, she had to downgrade to something modest. For someone whose image was built on luxury, that was a social death sentence. I later heard she'd quietly put her condo up for sale, trying to keep ahead of her debts. My parents reached out twice in the weeks after. The first time was a text from my mom. "Can we talk? We're still family." I ignored it. The second time was a voicemail from my dad, his tone strained. "We need to find a way forward. You can't just cut us off like this." I deleted it without listening to the end. The thing is, I hadn't cut them off out of anger. I'd simply recognized that there was nothing left to salvage. They'd made it clear who they were when they stole from me, lied about me, and celebrated my supposed downfall. I'd just responded in kind, except I did it without losing my integrity. Months later, the development project began to turn a profit. The townhomes sold faster than projected, and my share of the returns was more than enough to make the theft they'd committed feel like a rounding error. Sometimes I drive past the completed site, watching families move into the homes, kids running around the freshly paved streets. It was mine now, built from their arrogance and my patience. I never saw them at Sunday dinners again. In fact, I never saw them at all. The occasional rumor trickled back through Jacob. How my parents had sold their vacation property. How Lily had taken on extra cases at work to keep afloat, but they were just pieces of a life that no longer touched mine. The last time I heard from my mother was in a short, almost brittle email. "You've changed." I read it twice, then closed my laptop. She was wrong. I hadn't changed. I'd simply stopped playing the role they wrote for me. And I realized as I looked out over the city from my penthouse balcony that night, that was the real victory. Not the money, not the property, but the fact that they finally understood I didn't need them, their approval, or their version of who I was supposed to be. The final time I thought about it, I smiled to myself and said out loud, just once for my own satisfaction, I didn't just live in the streets, I bought the whole block. And that's when everything changed. The same family who mocked me, used me, and tossed me aside came crawling back the moment they realized I no longer needed them. They thought they could control me. They thought I would always be the weak one. But they forgot one thing. People remember how you treat them when they had nothing. So I let them feel exactly what they once made me feel. I didn't shout. I didn't argue. I didn't even explain myself. I simply closed every door they once slammed in my face. The bank account they used to drain? Closed? The access they took for granted? Gone? The favors they demanded? Not anymore. For the first time in my life, I chose myself. And that was the sweetest revenge of all. And the funniest part? They still don't understand that they didn't lose me. They lost someone who would have given them everything. What do you think? Was I right for walking away and letting them feel the consequences of their own actions? Or should family always get another chance? Let me know in the comments. And if you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to Twisted Revenge Tales for more twisted stories like this.